Hi, my name is Morgan Delaney. I'm 26 years old, and this is my story. It starts with a house, but it's really about so much more. About sacrifice, about betrayal, and eventually, about revenge. You see, 5 years ago, I made a choice that would shape everything that followed. A choice I believed was grounded in love, loyalty, and a deep desire to protect the people who raised me. But sometimes, the people we protect end up being the ones who hurt us the most. And when that happens, something inside you breaks or hardens. I never thought I'd be the type of person who could turn cold. But when your entire world shifts beneath you, when you realize that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, your heart adapts. Mine did, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all began. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after being betrayed by family. And don't forget to like and subscribe to see how I turned 5 years of sacrifice into a life I finally chose for myself. I grew up in Manchester, New Hampshire. Small town charm, brick-lined streets, snowy winters. My parents, Ruth and Thomas Delaney, were middle class through and through, hardworking, frugal, and proud. My father worked as an auto mechanic for almost 3 decades, and my mother spent most of her adult life managing a small thrift store 2 blocks from our home. We lived in a modest 2-story house on Walnut Street, the kind of house with creaky floors, a front porch swing, and holiday decorations that never matched. It wasn't glamorous, but it was home, and it was paid for, or so I thought. It wasn't until I turned 21 that I found out the truth. My parents had taken a second mortgage on the house years before. Medical bills, my sister's college tuition, a string of financial setbacks they never talked about. They were behind on payments, dangerously close to foreclosure. I had just graduated from a community college at the time, working full-time at a logistics company while saving for my own apartment. But when they came to me, overwhelmed and ashamed, asking for help to buy time, I didn't hesitate. I told them I'd cover the mortgage until they could get back on their feet. 6 months, maybe a year, tops. But a year turned into 2. 2 turned into 5. I was 21 when I started. I'm 26 now. And I've been making every single mortgage payment since, 1-845-32s every month, without fail, while juggling student loans, while climbing my way up the ranks at work, while saying no to vacations, new clothes, dinners out. My friends bought cars and upgraded apartments. I stayed in a cramped studio, living paycheck to paycheck, because I believed I was doing the right thing, and I never asked for anything in return, until my sister came back. Ah yes, Ava, my older sister, the golden child. 3 years older, charming, clever, always the center of attention. She left New Hampshire right after college to find herself, bouncing from city to city, boyfriend to boyfriend. I won't lie, I used to admire her. I used to wish I had her confidence. But admiration doesn't last forever. Not when she returned to Manchester, practically unannounced, with a suitcase in one hand and a new business idea in the other. She was broke, of course, jobless, single again, and yet, she waltzed back into our parents' lives like nothing had changed, and they welcomed her like a hero returning from battle. I remember the night clearly. I had just gotten off work, exhausted, and stopped by the house to drop off the mortgage check. My mother was in the kitchen, laughing. My father was on the couch, beaming, and there was Ava, sitting in my old chair, sipping wine from a glass I bought, looking like she belonged. It was like I had stepped into some alternate reality. They didn't even ask how my day had gone. Over the next few weeks, things shifted, subtly at first. My name, once spoken with appreciation, became background noise. Ava started managing things around the house, suggesting repairs, moving furniture, bringing in ideas for renovations. She even started calling it her home base as she planned her next big move. I should have spoken up. I should have drawn a line. But part of me was still the loyal daughter, still the girl who believed that sacrifice would be acknowledged, that maybe, just maybe, my parents would eventually say, "Morgan, you've carried us. We see you. This home is yours." But instead, they gave it to her. I found out on a Tuesday. I had gone over with paperwork, some new loan terms the bank had sent. I wanted my parents to be aware, even though the house was still under their name. That's when my father, without even looking me in the eye, said the words that would change everything. "We've decided to transfer the deed to Ava." I thought I had misheard him. "What?" I laughed nervously. "The what?" "The house," he repeated. "She's going to live here permanently. It just makes sense to keep it in the family. And since you're always busy with work and your apartment, we figured she'd make better use of it." I stared at him, then at my mother, who looked down at her hands like a child caught stealing. "I've been paying this mortgage for 5 years," I said quietly. "Every single month." "We know," my mother said, barely above a whisper. "And we're so grateful, Morgan. We couldn't have made it without you. But this isn't about that." "It isn't about that?" I felt something in me snap, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like the sound of a thread breaking after being pulled too tight. That night, I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I walked out of the house without another word, but I knew, in that moment, that something had died in me. The version of Morgan who sacrificed. The version who kept believing that loyalty and effort would be rewarded. She was gone, and in her place, someone else began to emerge. Someone who knew that trust, once broken, doesn't heal the same way. Someone who realized that sometimes being the good one just makes you the easiest one to betray. And someone who, slowly but surely, started to plan. Because if they thought I'd just walk away from 5 years of sacrifice, they had no idea who they were dealing with. The days after that conversation felt like I was living underwater. Everything was muted. Voices, sounds, thoughts. I went through the motions at work, nodded when spoken to, but inside I was frozen in disbelief. People say betrayal stings, but what they never tell you is how cold it feels. Like being cast out into the snow without a coat, watching the ones you love light a fire for someone else. I didn't return to the house on Walnut Street again, not for visits, not to drop off checks, not even when my father left 3 voicemails asking if I could still cover 1 more month until Ava got things settled. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Something inside me refused to let my voice form even a single word for them. Instead, I poured myself into work. I started taking overtime, stayed late even when I didn't have to. My apartment was still small, still cramped, but for the first time it felt like mine. No guilt, no obligation, just space. Space to breathe, space to think. And thinking, I did. I thought about every sacrifice I had made, about the vacations I skipped, the dinners I declined, the dates I canceled, all because I needed to make that monthly mortgage. I thought about the way my parents smiled at Ava, the way they seemed to glow when she walked into the room, even when she was jobless, careless, and full of promises she never kept. I thought about loyalty, what it meant, what it cost, and how easily mine had been dismissed. But more than anything, I thought about revenge. Not the dramatic, movie-style kind. Not torches or lawsuits or screaming matches. No, I wanted something quieter, smarter. I wanted them to feel it the way I had felt it. Slowly, deeply, irrevocably. So I started paying attention. You see, Ava wasn't just a golden child. She was a ticking time bomb. She had grand ideas, sure, but follow-through had never been her strength. She spoke of opening a boutique, then an online store, then a lifestyle blog. All beautiful concepts, none of which ever got past the planning stage. My parents always believed in her dreams. I knew she'd disappoint them again. It was only a matter of time. And when that time came, I'd be ready. I began documenting everything. The bank statements, my email history with their lender, the money trail, the signed permission slips, the old texts from my mom thanking me for saving the house again. I collected every piece like a puzzle, building a timeline, quietly, methodically, without emotion. Because while emotions make you human, they also make you sloppy. I started asking around too. My friend Kelsey worked at the county recorder's office, small town perks. Over coffee one weekend, I casually asked her to check on the title of my parents' house. When she pulled it up, I felt my throat tighten. The deed had officially been transferred to Ava, just like they said. But what I didn't expect was the second document attached. Ava had taken out a personal line of credit using the house as collateral, less than 2 months after the transfer. That house, my house, the one I kept afloat for 5 years, was now leveraged against another one of her ventures. I thanked Kelsey, smiled like nothing was wrong, and walked home in silence. The next day, I stopped by a local attorney's office. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for. I wasn't planning to sue them, not yet, but I needed information, guidance, a way to reclaim something, if not the house, at least my dignity. The lawyer, Mr. Ellison, was kind, patient, listened without interrupting. After I laid everything out, every payment, every text, every broken promise, he leaned back in his chair and said something that stayed with me. "You may not get the house," he said, "but you can make sure no one forgets whose blood paid for it." I left with that line echoing in my ears. Meanwhile, Ava was spiraling. It started subtly. A call from my father asking if I'd heard from her. She'd missed a payment. Then my mom texting vague things like, "Ava's just going through a rough patch." But I knew better. Ava wasn't just going through a phase. She was flailing. She had no job, no backup. And now, thanks to her impulsive loan, she was about to lose the one asset keeping her afloat. It was poetic in a way. By the time winter hit, the signs were obvious. The Christmas lights on the Walnut House never went up. The windows stayed dark. I heard from a neighbor that Ava had been fighting with my parents almost daily. Apparently, her boutique plans had run into supplier issues. And the blog? Dead after 3 posts. I stayed silent, but I watched and waited. In January, a foreclosure notice was posted on the front door. It was a quiet Tuesday. Snow dusted the sidewalks, and the air was so cold it hurt to breathe. I took a walk on my lunch break, casually passing Walnut Street. I didn't stop, didn't slow down. But when I saw the paper flapping gently in the wind, something inside me loosened. I wasn't happy, not exactly, but I felt whole. I knew that once again they'd probably come to me, ask for help, frame it as a last resort, promise things would be different. But this time, I had no intention of saving them. And yet, life is rarely that simple. One evening in late February, I heard a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, my mother stood there, coat too thin for the cold, eyes sunken and wet. "Morgan," she said, voice trembling, "we need to talk." I let her in, silently. She sat on the edge of my couch like it hurt to relax. I offered her tea. She declined. Then she began. She told me Ava had defaulted on the loan, that the bank was seizing the house, that they had no savings left, no backup plan, and nowhere to go. But we thought, maybe you could talk to the bank, show them the payments you made. Maybe they'd help you get it back? I asked flatly. She nodded, eyes pleading. "You mean the house you gave away like it was a Christmas present?" My voice was calm, almost eerily so. "The one I paid for while you pretended not to notice me." She didn't answer. I stared at her, really looked at her. The woman who had once kissed my scraped knees, braided my hair, whispered lullabies when the world felt too loud. She looked so small now, so human. "I can't help you," I said softly. "Not this time." Her lip quivered. "Morgan, we're your family." And that's when it hit me. Family isn't just who raises you. It's who sees you, values you, stands by you when it's inconvenient. And by that definition, I hadn't had a family in years. "I know," I said, standing. "That's why I'm letting you go." She cried. She begged. But I didn't change my mind. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally cared about myself more. That night, I sat in my apartment, alone, silent, and wrote a letter to Ava. A letter she would never read, but one I needed to write. It was the start of something, a new chapter, one where I wasn't the martyr, one where I stopped bleeding for people who never offered a bandage. I didn't know where the path would lead next, but I knew this. I wasn't done yet. They had taken the house, but I still had the truth, and soon the whole town would know it too. The weeks after my mother left my apartment passed quietly, but not peacefully. There was no explosion, no confrontation, just silence. And in that silence, I found something unexpected. clarity. I had spent so many years wrapped up in guilt, loyalty, and the desperate need to be enough that I had forgotten what it meant to live for myself. Now, with nothing tying me to the people who betrayed me, I finally had space to think. But clarity doesn't mean closure. I kept remembering every check I wrote. Every month I covered that mortgage while they pretended it was just temporary. I remembered the holidays I spent alone in my apartment because Ava came back to town and suddenly there wasn't enough space for me at the table. I remembered how they smiled at her, supported her, gave her the very house I kept alive, while I was treated like a footnote. And I couldn't let it go. I didn't want to just move on. I wanted the truth to be seen. I wanted them to be seen for who they really were. Not by me, but by everyone. Because people in Manchester, especially the older ones who'd known my parents for decades, still looked at them like they were model citizens. Hardworking, selfless, devoted to their daughters. That was the story everyone believed. And I was about to rewrite it. It started with a post. Just one. On a quiet Sunday morning, I sat at my kitchen table, stared at my screen, and wrote something simple. For 5 years, I paid the mortgage on my parents' home to save it from foreclosure. I never asked for recognition. I never asked for repayment. Then they gave the house to my sister. She's now defaulted on a loan she took out against it. The house is being seized. And for the first time, I'm not fixing it. I didn't name names. I didn't point fingers. I just told the truth. And within an hour, it had been shared over 100 times. By that evening, local pages were buzzing. People messaged me privately, some with shock, others with support, and a few even sharing their own family betrayals. I hadn't expected that. I hadn't realized how many people carried similar scars. But the real shock came Monday morning. When I arrived at work, my coworker Daniel greeted me with a raised eyebrow and said, "Looks like someone finally told the Delaney story." I blinked. "What?" He tilted his phone toward me. It was the Facebook page of the Manchester Chronicle, our local paper. There, front and center, was a piece titled, "The Price of Loyalty, One Woman's Story of Family and Sacrifice." It was a write-up based on my post, mixed with details they'd gathered from public records. The mortgage, the deed transfer, the foreclosure. It was all there. By noon, the town knew everything. My phone buzzed nonstop. People I hadn't spoken to in years reached out. My old high school teacher, a family friend from church, even the barista at the coffee shop near Walnut Street. But more than the messages, there were the whispers. I knew my parents felt it. And Ava? She must have been livid. But I didn't hear from them. Not for 3 days. And then came the knock. I opened the door and found Ava standing there, her usual glow dimmed. She wore designer sunglasses, still clinging to her image, but her lips were tight and pale. "Nice article," she said flatly. I said nothing. "You made us look like monsters." I leaned against the doorframe. "I didn't make you look like anything. I told the truth. That's the part that hurts, isn't it?" She removed her sunglasses and stared at me. "You're bitter." "No," I replied calmly. "I'm awake." She scoffed. "This is petty. You're embarrassing yourself." "Then walk away," I said, motioning toward the street. "If you really think this doesn't matter, if none of it is true, then you have nothing to prove." But she didn't move. Instead, her voice dropped to a whisper. "The bank's taken the house." "I know. We have nowhere to go." I raised an eyebrow. "We?" She faltered. "They're staying with me, for now." I nodded slowly. "And I'm sure that'll go well." She didn't deny it. There was a long pause. Then she said, "What do you want, Morgan?" I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was something sharper, sadder. "I wanted you to understand," I said, "but I don't think you ever will." She turned to leave. I watched her walk down the steps in silence. I didn't feel satisfaction. Not really. But I felt something close to balance. Still, I wasn't finished, because one part of the story remained untold. The part about the payments, the proof, the records. I sent it all to the Chronicle. Bank statements, scanned checks, text threads, photos of receipts. Even the signed letter from my father authorizing me to speak to the mortgage lender on their behalf. I wanted them to see this wasn't just a dramatic story. It was fact. Documented. Irrefutable. The follow-up article dropped a week later. "The Forgotten Daughter, A closer look at the woman who saved her family's home. This time, it went viral. Regional news picked it up. Then a podcast that covered real-life betrayals. They invited me to speak. I hesitated at first, but then I agreed. I told my story. Calmly, honestly, without venom, just truth. After that, everything shifted. I didn't expect to become that girl from the mortgage story, but I did. For a while, people treated me like some kind of hero, or survivor, or warning. I didn't mind. Because something remarkable happened during that time. I started to heal. Not because I got justice. Not because Ava or my parents apologized, because they didn't. But because I stopped hiding. I stopped protecting people who didn't protect me. I stopped shrinking to keep others comfortable. I stopped begging to be seen. And in doing so, I found something I hadn't had in years: peace. Of course, there were still hard days. Loneliness crept in sometimes, especially when the holidays rolled around. I missed the smell of cinnamon in my mother's kitchen, my dad's laugh when he watched those old black and white Christmas movies, even Ava's terrible singing when she decorated the tree. But memory is complicated. It doesn't just hold the good. It holds everything. And over time, I learned to sit with that, to let the warmth and the ache exist side by side, to stop wishing for different parents, a different sister, a different past. Instead, I built something new, my own traditions, my own future, my own home. Because yes, I finally bought a house, a small place, not far from the river, with creaky floors and mismatched light fixtures. But it's mine, every tile, every wall, every corner, and no one will ever take it from me. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but sometimes it's not about serving it at all. Sometimes the greatest revenge is thriving when they expected you to collapse. And I was just getting started. After the podcast aired, something shifted inside me, not just in how I saw my family, but in how I saw myself. For years, I'd been walking around carrying a version of me that was too afraid to take up space, too loyal for her own good, too desperate to be chosen by people who only ever valued my silence. But now I was shedding that skin. Not overnight. It never happens that fast. But slowly, piece by piece, I started rebuilding from the ashes of what they burned. The first real change was how I spoke. I used to second-guess everything I said, always double-checking my tone or worrying if someone would be uncomfortable with the truth. I'd apologize before making a point. I'd downplay my accomplishments. But after telling my story, first online, then publicly, I realized how powerful it is to speak plainly, to say what happened without softening the edges. I stopped minimizing what I had endured. I stopped adding, "but they meant well," after every betrayal. I stopped explaining away their choices to protect their image. And once I stopped doing that for them, I started doing everything else for me. I applied for a promotion at work, one I had avoided pursuing out of fear I wasn't ready enough. The role required public speaking, project leadership, and overseeing a team, things I knew I could do but had convinced myself others were more qualified to handle. But this time, I didn't hesitate. I submitted my application, included everything I'd accomplished, and walked into that interview like someone who knew her worth. Not surprisingly, I got the job, and for the first time in a long time, I felt proud of myself without needing anyone else to say it. Outside of work, I began allowing myself the things I used to say I couldn't afford, not financially, but emotionally. I joined a book club at the local library. I started taking long walks in Livingston Park again, the way I used to before everything got so heavy. I tried cooking new recipes instead of just eating frozen meals after a long day. These may sound small, but for me, they were monumental. Every new choice was a declaration. I am not who they left behind. I am becoming who I choose to be. But healing isn't linear. There were setbacks. About 2 months after the second article came out, I ran into my father at the gas station. I hadn't seen him since the fallout. He looked older, tired, weathered in a way that had nothing to do with age. He was standing by the pump, staring at the screen like it had personally betrayed him. And when he turned and saw me, something flickered across his face. Not anger, not shame. Something more hollow. "Morgan," he said, almost surprised. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I didn't owe him anything anymore. Not even a hello. He stepped forward. I read what you posted. I tilted my head. Which part? He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes darting away. All of it, I guess. I waited, letting the silence stretch. You didn't have to make it public, he finally said. You could have come to us. I actually laughed. Not out of humor, but disbelief. I did come to you, I said. For 5 years. Every month. Every time I handed you a check, I was coming to you. You just weren't listening. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Why did you do it? I asked, voice lower now. Why give the house to her? After everything I did? He didn't answer right away. He looked at the ground. She needed it. I felt that old sting in my chest. The absurdity. The ache. So did I whispered. You just didn't care. He looked at me then, really looked at me. We didn't know how to say thank you, and we thought, maybe you didn't need it as much. You always seemed strong, and there it was. The twisted logic that punishes the reliable. I nodded slowly. You mistook endurance for invincibility. He didn't argue. He didn't apologize either. He just stood there, shrinking in the cold wind, unsure of how to reach me now that I had finally stepped beyond his grasp. We parted ways without resolution, and oddly, I was okay with that. Closure isn't always a conversation. Sometimes it's just a decision. A week later, I got a letter from the bank. Not addressed to me, but to Ava. It had been mistakenly sent to my apartment because, for a long time, she had used my address for her business correspondence. I opened it before I realized the name, habit, not intention, and when I read what it said, my breath caught in my throat. Ava had filed for bankruptcy. The boutique, the loans, the lifestyle. It had all come crashing down. The last thread of her illusion had snapped. I don't know why, but I sat there for a long time just holding the paper. Not happy, not smug, just still. It felt like the final piece of a very long, painful puzzle had finally clicked into place. It confirmed what I already knew. Everything that happened had nothing to do with me being unworthy. It had everything to do with them being incapable of seeing what was right in front of them. The day I bought my house, my real house, not the one I paid for and was cast out of, I walked through every empty room before moving in. It was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of silence that echoes. But instead of feeling lonely, I felt grounded. Here, I was safe. Here, no one would rewrite the story. Here, every nail, every wall, every window was mine. I painted the walls myself, chose warm colors for the living room, a soft green for the bedroom. I planted flowers in the front yard. Nothing fancy, just some lavender and daisies. I hung art on the walls that made me feel calm, strong, seen. I turned the guest room into a reading space, even though I had no plans for visitors. It didn't matter. It was for me. I stopped checking their social media, stopped asking mutual friends if they were okay. I didn't wish them harm, but I no longer tied my happiness to their well-being. Letting go of that felt like unshackling myself. And then something happened that surprised me. People began to come to me. Not reporters, not followers. People. Real people. Colleagues, neighbors, strangers. They came with their own stories, their own scars, their own versions of being the one who gave too much and got nothing back. They told me how reading about my experience helped them leave toxic relationships, confront siblings, stand up for themselves. Some cried, some just nodded. And in their eyes, I saw pieces of myself. I had never set out to inspire anyone. But maybe that's what happens when you tell the truth without shame. It frees other people to do the same. One woman, Elaine, was older, probably in her 60s. She came up to me after a community event and said, "You know, my brother took everything from our parents. I kept quiet for decades. I wish I'd had your courage when I was your age." I squeezed her hand and said, "You have it now, because it's never too late to choose yourself, never too late to rewrite the ending, never too late to start again." The real turning point wasn't in what they lost. It was in what I gained. And yet, as the dust settled, as I built a new life from the wreckage of the one I was cast out of, I started to feel something I hadn't expected. Not forgiveness, not regret, but readiness. The kind of readiness that comes when the pain no longer owns you, but instead sharpens you into something wiser, more precise. I was no longer angry all the time. I was no longer replaying their words, their choices, their betrayals like a broken record. I was watching, learning, and preparing, not because I still wanted to get even, but because I wanted to get free. But something about justice still felt unfinished. That's when I received an email. A journalist from Boston who had seen my podcast interview reached out. She was working on a feature about financial betrayal inside families, how love is used as leverage, how loyalty is often weaponized to silence the ones who give the most. She said she had spoken to women all over New England. My name kept coming up. Would I be willing to sit down for a formal interview? At first, I hesitated. I had already opened up once. Did I want to pull everything back into the spotlight again? But then I remembered Ava's face the last time we spoke, the confidence that had cracked, the guilt she tried to hide behind insults. I thought about my parents' silence, about how the ones who should have protected me instead used me as a shield and then tossed me aside the moment they no longer needed cover. And I realized this wasn't about attention. It was about truth, about standing tall, without flinching. So I said yes. We met in a quiet cafe just outside the city. Her name was Madeline, late 30s, clear eyes, warm voice. She asked careful questions, didn't prod, didn't sensationalize. She just listened. And as I told my story, again, from the beginning, I noticed something shifting in how I spoke. I wasn't shaking this time. I didn't choke on my words. I didn't water anything down. I was calm, clear, rooted. You're not bitter, she said softly, notebook in hand. No, I replied. I'm just done being invisible. The article ran 2 weeks later. It wasn't just a story. It was the story. Full-page spread. Title in bold, The Invisible Heir. How one woman paid for a home. She was never welcome in. It opened with a photo of me standing in front of my new house, arms folded, expression strong but unyielding. Within days, the ripple effect began. People started tagging me on social media. Women in similar situations from across the country reached out. A therapist group in Portland asked to use my story in their financial abuse education module. A support group for estranged adult children from Boston invited me to speak. I couldn't keep up with the messages. But one stood out. It was from a woman named Dina. She was a financial advisor who had spent years helping women escape economically manipulative families. She'd read my story. She wanted to help me close the loop. At first, I didn't understand. I don't have anything left to fix, I told her on the phone. That's not true, she replied. You've survived. You've reclaimed your voice. But they still own the narrative in legal and financial terms. There may still be leverage, depending on what paperwork you have. And that one sentence made something click. I did still have everything. The receipts, the texts, the signed permission letters, the emails between me and the bank confirming my monthly deposits. I had always saved them out of pain, out of a desire to prove to myself I wasn't crazy. But what if they could serve another purpose? Dina and I met that weekend. She looked through everything, her brows furrowing, nodding, flipping pages. Have you ever considered filing a claim for equitable interest? She asked. No, I said. I didn't think I had legal standing. You might, she said. In New Hampshire, there's precedent. It's rare, but if you can show you made consistent payments on a property you were promised interest in, especially with documented proof and verbal agreements, you could potentially file a civil claim. My heart pounded. I had walked away. I had told myself revenge wasn't necessary. But this wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about protecting me. Over the next month, we assembled a case. Dina introduced me to a lawyer who specialized in property disputes. We drafted statements, organized records, requested copies of title transfers, bank documentation, and Ava's loan agreements. Every night I came home and sorted paperwork like I was rebuilding the spine of a story that had once left me broken. When we finally filed the claim, it didn't feel vindictive. It felt just. I didn't know how it would end, but I knew this. They wouldn't rewrite history. And then, out of nowhere, Ava showed up at my door again. She looked tired, pale. her usual confidence replaced by something brittle. "I heard about the filing," she said without greeting. I said nothing. I let her stand there and sit in it. "I came to ask you not to go through with it." I raised my eyebrows. "Really?" She shifted her weight. "This will ruin them." I held her gaze. "They ruined themselves." Her voice cracked. "Morgan, come on." "No," I said. "You come on. Come clean. Own it." "I can't." "You never could," I said, my voice sharper now. "That's always been the problem." She looked down, and for the first time, I saw it. Not guilt, not sorrow, fear. Pure, unfiltered fear. Because she knew she had pushed too far. Because she knew I had nothing left to lose. Because for the first time in her life, I wasn't going to back down. "You used me," I said. "And when you were done, you discarded me. Just like them." "They love you," she tried. "No," I said. "They love who I was. The girl who said yes. The girl who paid the bills and never asked questions. But that girl's gone. And the woman standing here? She's not going to keep bleeding so you can stay comfortable." She swallowed hard. "Please," she said one last time. And I said nothing. I closed the door. Not in rage, but in peace. The court date was set. It would be weeks before anything was final, but I wasn't waiting for a verdict to move forward. I had already won. Not because I might get money back, not because I had media attention, but because I had turned every scar into a sword. Because I had stopped begging for love and started demanding respect. Because I had rewritten my own story. And this time, no one else was holding the pen. The court day arrived in the quiet of spring. The skies over Manchester were still gray, a little chilly, but the kind of weather that felt honest. No dramatic storm clouds, no golden sunburst, just a still, sober air that matched the weight of what I was about to do. I stood outside the courthouse for a moment before going in, my hands in the pockets of a navy blue coat I bought for myself months ago, a small, symbolic gesture of self-worth. I breathed deeply. No fear, no anxiety, just the soft rhythm of something inevitable. Inside, the room was modest. A civil court, nothing like the dramatic ones on TV. The floors were scuffed, the walls painted that dull beige that makes everything feel a little colder. My attorney, a calm woman named Rachel, sat beside me. She was sharp without being arrogant, and I appreciated that about her. Across the room sat Ava and our parents. My mother avoided my gaze. My father kept his hands folded. Ava looked angry, like she couldn't believe we had actually come this far. But I wasn't there for a performance. I was there for truth. The judge, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a steady tone, began by reviewing the documents we had submitted. Mortgage payments, bank transfers, written communication, voicemails, texts. The signed letter my father wrote 5 years ago authorizing me to speak on behalf of the household finances. All of it compiled, labeled, neatly presented in a binder I had helped put together. Rachel opened by stating the case with clarity. "This isn't about vengeance," she said. "This is about fairness." Miss Delaney made consistent financial contributions with the understanding that she was supporting her family's stability and preserving the family home. She never signed away her rights. She was not compensated. She was, effectively, treated as a lender, without benefit, without interest, and without recourse. Ava's lawyer, a man in a gray suit with slicked-back hair, argued that there was no formal contract, no written agreement promising ownership or reimbursement. "It was a gift," he said with a straight face. "Miss Delaney was helping her parents. That's not a legal obligation. That's a family arrangement. Unfortunate, perhaps, but not uncommon." I remember sitting there, my fists clenched under the table, thinking about the word gift, as if the years I sacrificed weren't real, as if my effort, my exhaustion, my declining social life, my missed opportunities, they were all just some charitable offering made without hope of return. Rachel countered with everything we had. Emails with words like, "Thank you for saving the house again." Texts from my mother calling me our rock. Records showing how Ava hadn't made a single payment toward the mortgage in all the time I had. It wasn't just about money. It was about intent, pattern, contribution. It was about how they had leaned on me, depended on me, and discarded me once my usefulness ran out. The hearing wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no tears, just truth laid bare. When it was over, the judge said he would take it under advisement. He would review everything and issue a decision within 30 days. I thanked Rachel. I walked out without looking back. But that evening, as I sat at home, something strange happened. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel relieved. I felt still, like standing on the edge of a lake that had once been turbulent but was now glass smooth, because I realized something important. No matter what the judge decided, I had already taken back my story. The legal result mattered, yes, but not as much as knowing I had honored myself after years of silence, that I had refused to stay small for the comfort of others, that I had faced the people who hurt me without letting their shame become mine, and that was worth more than any ruling. Still, when the envelope came, 30 days later, just as promised, I held my breath as I opened it. The judge ruled in my favor. He didn't award me the house. It had already gone through foreclosure, but he did rule that my financial contributions, totaling over $110,000 across 5 years, constituted a constructive trust. Legally, my parents and Ava owed me restitution for unjust enrichment. A repayment plan would be ordered based on their income and assets. In short, they would have to pay me back. It wouldn't come all at once. And I knew Ava wouldn't be the one making the payments. My parents would. She was already bankrupt. She had nothing left to give. But that wasn't my concern anymore. The judgment was clear. They took from me, and now they would return it. I didn't call them. I didn't write. The court handled the arrangements, and I let it be. The first check arrived a month later. It was small, barely a dent in the total, but it was something, a symbol. Proof that, after everything, I was no longer the one sacrificing in silence. Life continued quietly. I settled deeper into my home, planted more flowers, hung photos of places I wanted to travel. My bookshelf grew fuller. I started journaling again. I tried pottery. I learned how to fix a leaky faucet by myself. Little things. But each one felt like a brick in the foundation of the life I was building, not from ashes anymore, but from hope. Friends who had watched everything unfold began to open up more about their own family dynamics. We had long conversations about boundaries, love, and what it really means to choose yourself when doing so feels like betrayal. But I've learned something powerful. Choosing yourself is only betrayal to people who expect you to live in service to them. And I was done with that. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the mirror and barely recognize the woman looking back. Not because she had changed physically, but because she finally stood without apology. There was weight in her gaze, calm in her voice, fire in her chest. Not a rageful fire, but the kind that warms you in winter, that guides you through the dark. People in town still talked. Some whispered, some praised, some stayed awkwardly silent. But that wasn't my responsibility. I had spent years trying to manage how people saw me, trying to prove I was good, loyal, worthy. Now I simply was. The past didn't disappear. I still remembered what they did. I still remembered the look on my mother's face that night in my apartment, the way my father avoided my eyes in court, the way Ava's voice cracked when she realized I wasn't going to save her this time. I remembered, but I didn't live there anymore. That version of me, the one who bled herself dry to be seen, she was gone. In her place stood a woman who had been tested, who had fallen, who had stood back up, not bitter, not broken, but burning with clarity. I don't know what happened to Ava after that. I assume she moved on, found another way to rebuild her life, or maybe not. I don't keep tabs. I don't ask. My parents continued sending the court-mandated checks. No letters, no phone calls, no apologies. That was fine. I wasn't waiting for one. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't something you owe to others. It's something you offer to yourself when you're ready. And I wasn't there yet. Maybe I never would be. And that's okay. Because closure doesn't require reconciliation. It just requires truth. And I had mine. It's been 2 years since the court ruled in my favor. 2 years since I stood in that small courtroom in Manchester and watched the scales finally shift. Not in vengeance, not in spectacle, but in quiet, steady justice. And life? Life has grown around me, like vines wrapping around something old but still standing strong. I don't think of my parents every day anymore. I don't wake up with the weight of their betrayal sitting on my chest. The grief has softened into memory, the way a bruise fades until it's only tender if you press too hard. I still live in the same house. It's mine in a way nothing else ever has been. I've repainted the front door twice. First a bold red, then a deep ocean blue. I added wind chimes to the porch. The lavender in the front yard blooms fuller every spring, and now neighbors walk by and compliment it like it's always been part of the landscape. Inside, I've filled the space with warmth, books stacked in corners, candles I light at night even when I don't need them. I host dinners sometimes, not big ones, but enough to fill the space with laughter, with the sound of forks clinking against plates, with the kind of comfort I used to think only came from family. Turns out, comfort just needs kindness, and kindness can come from anyone willing to show up with love and no conditions. I see my reflection differently now. There's still the same eyes, same curve of the mouth, but the weight behind them has changed. I used to look at myself and see the daughter who wasn't enough. Now I see the woman who reclaimed her name, not by yelling, not by burning bridges, but by building something better on her own terms. People still ask me about it sometimes. The story, the fallout, the podcast and the article and the court ruling. I've learned how to talk about it without flinching. I no longer feel the need to make it softer, easier to digest. I speak the truth, and if it's uncomfortable, that's not my burden to carry. But not everything stayed behind. Sometimes I dream of Ava, not the Ava who stood in my doorway begging me to withdraw the case, not the Ava who smirked across the table in family dinners, always pulling the spotlight. No, I dream of the Ava from when we were young, 10 and 13, sharing a bedroom, whispering secrets under the blanket, making up songs, drawing maps of imaginary lands. I don't wake up crying, but I do wake up with a sense of absence, not longing, just the hollow knowledge that something once beautiful was turned into something sharp, and I no longer bleed for it, but I do acknowledge its ghost. I've started writing, not publicly, at least not yet. Just journals, notebooks, scattered Word docs, stories of other women, some fiction, some inspired by the ones who've reached out over the past 2 years. I write because it reminds me that truth is powerful, that silence can be a prison, that when we speak, when we name what was done to us, we light a fire in the dark, and that light reaches people we may never meet. One of the most surprising changes came when a local university invited me to speak. They were hosting a panel on economic abuse and power dynamics in family systems, and someone had suggested my story as a case study. I almost said no. Standing in front of a room full of strangers to talk about the most painful thing I'd ever lived through didn't sound appealing, but something nudged me. A quiet knowing that maybe my experience could be more than a scar. Maybe it could be a map for someone else lost in the dark. So I stood behind a podium in a beige auditorium and told them everything. I didn't cry. I didn't rush. I just told the truth. And when I finished, a young woman in the front row stood up and asked, "How did you finally know it was okay to stop helping people who were hurting you?" I smiled at her. "When I realized that love isn't proven by how much you endure," I said. "It's proven by how willing someone is to protect what you give them." She nodded slowly, and I knew that answer landed in a place she'd been holding quiet. After that, more invitations came. Conferences, articles, podcasts. I didn't say yes to everything, but I said yes to enough. Enough to know that my story didn't end with a gavel. It began again with every person who whispered, "I thought I was the only one." I've learned to take joy where it grows. In the first warm day of spring when I can drink coffee on the porch. In the sound of my best friend's laugh when I tell a bad joke. In the way my dog, Milo, curls against me at night like I'm his entire universe. In fresh sheets. In handwritten letters. In the fact that I don't flinch when the mail arrives anymore. I've carved out a life I never thought I'd have. Not flashy, not perfect, but mine, fully mine. And what about them? I don't really know. I hear things sometimes through the grapevine. Ava moved to another state. My parents sold a few assets to continue paying what the court ordered. They're quiet now. No public attempts to reclaim the narrative. No more contact. Just silence. And I've made peace with that. I don't wish them harm, but I also don't wish to be pulled back into their orbit. I've circled the sun too long trying to warm people who only ever turned me cold. Sometimes I imagine a different version of our story. One where my parents looked me in the eye and said, "Thank you. You saved us." One where Ava stood beside me instead of above me. One where loyalty was returned instead of taken for granted. But that's not how it went. And that's okay. I've stopped needing fantasy to soothe the truth. The truth is enough. I've even started dating again. Carefully. Slowly. I meet people who don't flinch when I talk about boundaries. People who listen instead of waiting for their turn to speak. People who ask, "How are you really?" and mean it. I don't know where it will lead, but for the first time, I'm choosing connection not out of loneliness, but out of fullness. I live by one rule now. If it costs me my peace, it's too expensive. I never imagined that being left behind would lead me here, to a life I crafted with my own hands. A life free of begging and pleasing and proving. But it did. And I'm grateful. Grateful not for the betrayal, but for what it revealed. For how it cut me open in a way that made room for truth. For how it taught me to stop knocking on doors that close themselves on people like me. I am not who I was when this began. I am not the girl who handed over paycheck after paycheck hoping to be seen. I am not the daughter who accepted scraps of attention and called it love. I am not the sister who waited for Ava to choose me over herself. I am the woman who chose herself when no one else would. And I will keep choosing her. Every single day. Always. Have you ever felt like the people you loved the most took your loyalty for granted? Share your experience in the comments. If Morgan's story moved you, please like and subscribe to hear more powerful journeys of resilience and self-worth. Send this to someone who might need a reminder that they are not alone, and that choosing yourself is not selfish, it's survival. Thank you for listening to my story, and never forget, you are allowed to walk away from anyone who makes you feel invisible.